Hi everyone, and welcome to another class of Physiology for Engineers with Professor Gonzalez-Fernandez at Lehigh University. In the lecture today, we're going to look at the central nervous system, and we are going to look in depth at three different concepts. So first, we are going to look into our brain, the different parts and the different functions of each part. Then we are going to look at the electroencephalogram, so at different types of waves that our brain produces when it's thinking or sleeping, and how those waves are measured. And then finally, because my students are very interested in this topic and this always comes up in my undergrad and my graduate class, we're going to look a bit more in depth into the molecular mechanism of Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so we'll start with the brain and with the central nervous system. So first, I wanted to have here a little schematic of the central nervous system. So we are going to have different parts. So here we're going to have the spinal cord. Then we are going to have the hindbrain. Then we have the midbrain. And finally, we have the forebrain. And this structure is more or less conserved in every mammal. But then our body in humans, we have specific characteristics that make us unique. So we are going to look at those a bit more in depth. In order to do so, I'm going to have a schematic of a human brain. Okay, so this is more or less the schematic of the human brain, and I'm going to use it to represent the different parts and tell you what happens in each of these parts, okay? Great. So first, what we have is going to be here, the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is important for motor memory. So here we are going to conserve the memory of the different movements that we learn, and then we never practice it again, but we still remember. For example, riding a bike or skiing, and also motor coordination. So how good you are at playing soccer or playing football. Okay, so then we have here the second part that is very important, which is the brainstem. So as I said, the cerebellum is going to be more the motor memory and motor coordination. The brainstem is going to regulate our basic needs, right? So it's going to regulate respiration, heart rate, and also digestion. And these different processes happen in the different parts of the brainstem. So first we have the midbrain. So in the midbrain, we are going to regulate everything related with breathing. Then we have the pons. So in the pons is going to be everything related to the circulation and our heart. And finally, we have the medulla oblongata. So in the medulla oblongata, we are going to process everything that is related to digestion. So again, the brainstem regulates the vital functions. Okay, let's go a bit farther on top of the of our brainstem and also our cerebellum, and we are going to find the thalamus. So the thalamus is very important because the thalamus is going to receive all the signals, so it's going to receive all the data, and then it's going to send the data to the different parts of our brain for processing. So this is a part that is going to process all the data that we are going to receive, and also has different regions and sections that are important that we have to look a bit more in depth. So first of all, here we have the hypothalamus. the hypothalamus, which is going to regulate body homeostasis and also the circadian rhythms, for example. And then very important here, in this part of the thalamus, is the pituitary gland. Pituitary. So this gland is very important because it's going to regulate the levels of water in our body through the secretion of antidiuretic hormone. Okay, so we have a look at the brainstem, the cerebellum, the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. And then we are going to go a bit higher. And a bit higher, we have the basal ganglia. So this is the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia is a lot of neurons that are going to control movement and motor responses. So this is pretty important in Parkinson's disease. And then on top of the basal ganglia, we're going to have another really important section of the brain, which is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is really important because it's going to connect the left side of our brain with the right side of our brain, so we can connect our emotional part on the left with our rational part on the right. So if we have a schematic like this one here, so this will be a cross-section of the brain, and here we have our left side, our emotional side, and here our right side, or a rational side. The corpus callosum is going to be here in the center, connecting both, okay? So this is why it's important. And then finally, we arrive to the rest of the brain that is called the cerebrum. So in the cerebrum, we also have a lot of different sections and different parts that are going to process and create responses for all the stimuli that we receive. Okay, so first of all, here we have the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is important because it's our emotional analysis. So it's going to analyze of our emotions and it's going to process those emotions. Then here, if we continue here, we have the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is very important to process sensations. And inside the parietal lobe, we have something really important that we are going to look a bit more in depth when we go through the sensory system, which is the somatosensory cortex. And then next to the somatosensory cortex, but in the frontal lobe, we have another cortex, which is the motor cortex. Which is going to process all our motor voluntary movements. Okay, let's continue. So then we have occipital lobe. So the occipital, which is around here, this is very important because it's going to control all the vision, and it's going to analyze and process all the images and light impulses that we receive through our eyes. And finally, we have the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe, which is around here, so it's very close, as you can imagine or see here, is very close to our ears. So that's going to be very important for hearing and also for language and memory. Okay, so I think that I've gone through all the regions of our brain. So starting, we have brainstem, cerebellum, thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, basal ganglia, corpus callosum, and then the lobes of the cerebrum, frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Very important, the motor cortex and the somatosensory cortex. So next, I'm going to focus a bit more on the electroencephalogram, or EEG, And also because all the neurons here in our brain, when they are fired, when they receive an action potential, they generate a wave that can be measured. And that's going to help us to do, for example, diagnosis for some diseases like epilepsy. Okay, so give me a sec that I delete everything and I'll be right back.